My mommy has been missing for 3 days, the toddler cried. Then the billionaire opened the door. A little girl stood at the top of the basement stairs, tugging on the sleeve of a billionaire, tears running down her small face. My mommy has been missing for 3 days, she whispered, her tiny hand shaking as she pointed toward the locked door below. He had trusted the woman he was about to marry with everything. His home, his heart, his family. But in the next 60 seconds, one door would change all of that forever. What he found behind it would break him, and it would prove that sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we should have watched the most. Before we dive in, tell us, what country are you watching from today? Drop your flag in the comments. We love seeing where you're all tuning in from. This story today is one you will not forget. It's about trust, betrayal, and a little girl brave enough to save the person she loved most. Let's get into it. A 3-year-old doesn't lie. That's what everyone kept forgetting. James Whitfield had built his entire empire out of control. At 45 years old, he ran 3 companies, sat on the board of 2 more, and owned a mansion on the edge of a quiet Georgia town that looked more like a small country than a house. Marble floors. A wine cellar bigger than most people's apartments. A view of rolling hills that stretched out further than the eye could follow. He had everything money could buy. What he didn't have, what he had never quite managed to hold on to, was peace. James had lost his wife 6 years earlier. Cancer. It had taken her slow, piece by piece, and it had taken something out of him too, something he never quite got back. After she passed, the big house had gone quiet in a way that made even the staff whisper when they walked through the halls. James threw himself into work because work didn't ask him questions he couldn't answer. Work didn't remind him of empty chairs at the dinner table. 2 years ago, he had hired Mia Coleman. Mia was 42, sharp-eyed, and steady in a way that made people trust her the moment she walked into a room. She had come to the Whitfield estate as head housekeeper with a resume full of glowing letters and a toddler on her hip named Harper, barely a year old at the time. Mia's husband had walked out on her before Harper was even born, and she had built a life out of nothing but grit and long hours. When James offered her a small cottage on the property so she wouldn't have to commute an hour each way, Mia had cried right there in his office. It was the first time in years someone had made things easier for her instead of harder. Over 2 years, Mia became more than staff. She learned the rhythm of the house, which windows stuck in the rain, which stairs creaked at night, what kind of tea James liked when he'd had a hard call with the board. And little Harper, now 3 years old, became something the whole household adored. She had this laugh that carried down hallways. She left crayon drawings taped to the refrigerator that the cook refused to throw away. Even James, a man who rarely smiled at breakfast anymore, would catch himself grinning when Harper toddled into the kitchen in mismatched socks demanding pancakes, shaped like stars, not circles. Mia never asked James for anything beyond her wages. She was careful that way. She'd seen what happened to women who let themselves get too comfortable in a rich man's house. So she kept her head down, did her job well, and made sure Harper stayed out of the way during meetings and dinners. But there was a warmth in that house because of her. Everyone felt it. Everyone, that is, except the woman who arrived 8 months ago and decided she didn't like sharing James's attention with anyone, especially not the help. Victoria Hale was 28 years old, stunning in the kind of practiced camera-ready way that made people stop and stare. And she had come into James's life at a charity gala where she'd accidentally spilled a glass of champagne on his jacket. James, lonely in a way he didn't like to admit, had found her charm intoxicating. She laughed at his jokes. She asked about his late wife with what seemed like genuine tenderness. She told him 3 weeks in that she had never met a man who made her feel so safe. James proposed 5 months later. Everyone around him, his lawyer, his sister, even his own driver, had quietly suggested he slow down. James hadn't listened. He was tired of being alone in that big house, and Victoria filled the silence. But almost as soon as she moved in, the silence was replaced with something else. Started small. Victoria complained that Mia looked at her the wrong way. She said the house didn't run efficiently enough, that Mia was too familiar with James, that a toddler running through a house this size was a liability and an embarrassment when guests came over. James brushed it off at first. New fiancé, new house, everyone needs time to adjust, he told himself. But the complaints didn't stop. They multiplied. Victoria began rearranging things in the house without asking. She let go of 2 long-time gardeners within her first month, replacing them with people James had never met, people who seemed to answer to her and no one else. She redecorated wings of the house that held photos of James's late wife, boxing up the pictures and calling it, "Making Room for Our Future." And every single time Mia's name came up, Victoria's tone shifted, sweet on the surface, but with something cold underneath, like ice hidden inside a smile. What none of them knew, what Victoria made absolutely sure no one knew, was that she had done this before. Different house, different man, different name. Even once upon a time, Victoria didn't fall in love with men. She fell in love with what they owned, and she had built a career, quiet and careful, out of marrying her way into fortunes and slowly, patiently, taking control of everything inside them. James's estate, the companies, the land, the accounts with more zeros than Victoria had ever seen in her life, was the biggest prize she had ever set her sights on. And she was not about to let a housekeeper and her 3-year-old stand in her way. "She just doesn't fit anymore, James," Victoria said one evening, curled against him on the couch, her voice soft as velvet. "I'm not trying to be difficult. I just think, once we're married, it might be time for a fresh start. New staff. A blank slate." James had frowned at that, something uneasy twisting in his chest. "Mia's been with us 2 years. Harper practically grew up here." "I know," Victoria said, and she'd pressed her lips to his cheek in a way that made the conversation feel finished before it had really started. "I just want it to be our home, that's all." James let it go that night. He told himself he'd bring it up again later, that he'd find a way to make Victoria understand what Mia meant to this house, to him, to the memory of the life he'd rebuilt out of grief. But something in the back of his mind wouldn't settle. A small, quiet feeling, the kind he usually trusted in the boardroom but had somehow stopped listening to in his own living room. He didn't know yet that a war had already begun in his house, one being fought entirely without his knowledge, in hallways and kitchens and empty rooms while he sat in his office reviewing quarterly reports. He didn't know that his fiancée had already made up her mind about what needed to happen to the woman and the little girl standing between her and everything she wanted. He didn't know that in just a few weeks, his own house would nearly swallow the person who had brought it the most light. Do you think James should have listened to that uneasy feeling sooner? Let us know in the comments below. Some people smile the widest right before they strike. The weeks that followed were quiet on the surface, the way the ocean looks calm right before a storm rolls in. Victoria stopped mentioning Mia directly to James. She had learned, quickly, that pushing too hard only made him defensive, protective even. So she changed her strategy. If she couldn't get James to fire Mia, she would make Mia's life difficult enough that the woman would leave on her own. It started with small, cruel things. Victoria would move items in the kitchen and blame Mia for disorganization in front of James. She'd leave impossible tasks with impossible deadlines, reorganize the entire East Wing library by morning, have the guest rooms repainted before a dinner party that was announced with barely a day's notice, and then sigh dramatically when things weren't finished exactly to her liking. She docked Mia's hours twice, claiming budget cuts James had supposedly approved, though James had approved no such thing. Mia never knew because Victoria made sure those conversations happened when James was traveling for work. Mia noticed the shift, of course. She wasn't foolish. She'd worked in enough houses over the years to recognize the particular chill of a woman who saw her as competition, even though Mia had never once looked at James as anything other than her employer. A kind one at that. But Mia needed this job. She needed the little cottage on the property, the steady paycheck, the health insurance that covered Harper's asthma medication. So she swallowed her pride and kept working, harder than ever, hoping that if she simply did everything right, the tension would eventually ease. Didn't. Harper, meanwhile, remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around her. She still ran through the halls chasing the cook's old cat, still left her stuffed rabbit in odd places, the mailbox once tucked inside a kitchen cabinet another time, and still charmed nearly everyone she crossed paths with. Everyone except Victoria, who had started giving the little girl a tight, thin-lipped look whenever she wandered too close. One afternoon, Harper had toddled into the sitting room where Victoria was on a video call with someone Mia didn't recognize. A man in a sharp suit, speaking in low, clipped tones about properties and timelines, and once the ring is on her finger. Harper, curious as 3-year-olds are, had reached out and grabbed a decorative glass bird off the side table, turning it over in her small hands. "Put that down," Victoria hissed, covering her phone's microphone. But Harper, startled by the sharpness in her voice, fumbled the bird and it slipped from her fingers, shattering against the hardwood floor. Victoria's reaction was swift and cold. She grabbed Harper by the arm, not gently, and marched her out into the hallway, calling for Mia in a voice loud enough that half the staff heard it. When Mia came running, she found her daughter crying, a thin red mark already rising on her small wrist. "Control your child," Victoria snapped, "or I will make sure James understands exactly what kind of environment you're bringing into this house." Mia had wanted to scream. She wanted to say a dozen things about what kind of woman grabbed a 3-year-old hard enough to leave a mark over a broken trinket. Instead, she scooped Harper into her arms, whispered soothing words into her daughter's hair, and walked away without a word, her whole body shaking with the effort of staying silent. That night, Mia sat on the edge of her bed in the cottage, Harper finally asleep beside her, and stared at the small mark still visible on her daughter's wrist. She thought about quitting. She thought about it seriously, packing their 2 suitcases and driving until the Whitfield estate was nothing but a memory in the rearview mirror. But then she thought about Harper's asthma inhalers, about the steady security this job had given them after years of scraping by, about James, who had never been anything but decent to her, who didn't even know what was happening in his own house. She decided to tell him. Just once, calmly, honestly. He deserved to know. The opportunity came 2 days later, a quiet evening when Victoria had gone into the city for a spa appointment. James was in his study, reading glasses pushed up into his graying hair, a mug of coffee going cold beside a stack of papers. Mia knocked softly. "Mr. Whitfield, can I speak with you for a moment? It's about Harper and Victoria." James looked up, something careful crossing his face. "Of course. Sit down, Mia." She told him everything. The broken bird, the grip on Harper's arm, the reduced hours, the impossible tasks. She kept her voice steady, factual, careful not to sound accusatory even though every word cost her something. James listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening more with every sentence. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "I had no idea," he said finally, his voice low. "I'm Mia, I'm so sorry. I'll talk to her. This isn't who I want this house to be." Relief washed over Mia, so strong it nearly brought tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "I just needed you to know." James kept his word. That night, when Victoria returned, he confronted her, gently at first, then more firmly when she tried to twist the story, claiming Harper had attacked her with a glass bird, that Mia was manipulating him against her. James didn't buy it. Not entirely. But Victoria cried, real tears sliding down her cheeks, and told him she was scared. Scared that he cared more about his housekeeper's feelings than hers. Scared that she'd never truly have a place in this house as long as Mia and Harper were there as a constant reminder of the family he'd had before her. It worked, at least partially. James softened. He told Victoria he loved her, that he wanted her to feel at home, that they'd figure out a better arrangement together. He did not, however, ask Mia to leave. And that, more than anything, told Victoria something important. James still valued Mia, which meant Mia was still an obstacle. And obstacles, Victoria had learned a long time ago, needed to be removed. Quietly. Completely. Before they became a real threat to everything she had spent months building toward. She just needed the right moment. And she was very, very good at waiting for those. Have you ever had to speak up about something you were afraid to say out loud? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. And then, in a single afternoon, everything changed. 3 weeks passed in an uneasy calm. Victoria was sweeter than she'd ever been. To James, at least. She brought him coffee in the mornings, asked about his day with what looked like real interest, laughed a little too loud at his jokes during dinner parties. To anyone watching from the outside, she looked like a woman deeply, happily in love. To Mia, she said almost nothing at all. And that silence was worse than any argument. Mia had grown up around enough difficult people to know that silence, in someone like Victoria, was never peace. It was a held breath. Pause before something worse. She was right to be afraid. It happened on a Thursday, the kind of gray, humid afternoon that made the whole house feel heavy. James had flown out that morning for a 2-day business trip to New York, a meeting with investors that had been on his calendar for months. Before he left, he'd kissed Victoria goodbye at the door, told her he loved her, and reminded her, almost as an afterthought, that Mia would be looking after the house while he was gone, same as always. Victoria had smiled and waved him off from the front steps. The moment his car disappeared down the long driveway, that smile dropped from her face like a mask sliding off. She had been planning this for weeks. Every detail. She knew James's return flight landed Saturday evening. She knew the household staff had Thursdays and Fridays off, a routine James had set up years ago to give people time with their families. She knew the cook wouldn't be back until Saturday morning to prep for a dinner James had planned. She knew, most importantly, that for nearly 48 hours, there would be no one on the property except herself, Mia, and Harper. That afternoon, Victoria asked Mia to help her carry some old boxes down to the basement. Decorations, she claimed, that needed sorting before a holiday event. Mia agreed without suspicion. She'd been down to that basement a dozen times before. It was a large, finished space, cool and dry, lined with old furniture and storage under bare bulb lighting, one door leading out to a narrow hallway and a set of stairs back up to the kitchen. Mia carried the last box down, set it beside the others, and turned to ask Victoria where she wanted it placed. The door was already closing. "Victoria!" Mia called out, confusion in her voice, taking a step toward the stairs. The lock clicked into place before she even reached the bottom step. "I'm sorry, Mia." Victoria's voice came through the door, flat and cold in a way Mia had never heard from her before, all the sweetness gone completely. "I really am. But you should have taken the hint months ago. Victoria, open this door right now. Harper is upstairs, she needs me." "Harper is fine. For now." "Pause. You've made this so much harder than it needed to be. All you had to do was quit. Just quit and take that kid and go somewhere far away from here. But no. You had to run to James. You had to make yourself indispensable. Do you have any idea how long I've worked for this?" "Months, Mia. Months of smiling at that man over dinner, listening to him talk about his dead wife like she was some kind of saint, playing house with a fortune I have earned every single day I've spent pretending to love him." Mia's blood ran cold. "You don't love him at all. Love is for people who don't need anything," Victoria said, almost laughing. "I need a lot of things, Mia. And you and your daughter are the only 2 people standing in the way of me getting them." Mia pounded on the door, screamed for help even though she already understood, with sickening clarity, that there was no one left in the house to hear her. She heard Victoria's footsteps retreating up the stairs, and then, worse than anything, she heard the sound of a second lock, a deadbolt from the sound of it, sliding into place at the top. She was trapped. Mia searched the basement frantically, But Victoria had planned this carefully. The single window was small, high, and barred. Decorative iron installed years ago by James's late wife for security. Never imagined it would one day be used against the very household it was meant to protect. There was no phone down there. No way to signal anyone. Just old furniture, a single bare bulb, and the growing, suffocating panic of a mother separated from her 3-year-old daughter with no way to reach her. Upstairs, Victoria found Harper in the playroom, sitting cross-legged with her stuffed rabbit, humming to herself. "Where's Mommy?" Harper asked, looking up with wide, trusting eyes. Victoria crouched down, and for just a moment, something almost like guilt flickered behind her eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. "Mommy had to go somewhere for a little while, sweetheart. You're going to stay with me." Harper's small face crumpled with worry, but she didn't cry, not yet. She simply nodded, the way children do when they trust the adult in front of them even when something feels wrong deep in their gut. Victoria kept her fed, kept her clothed, kept her physically safe in the technical sense. She wasn't a monster in every way, she told herself, just a woman doing what needed to be done. But she kept Harper close, kept her from wandering near the basement, kept a careful, watchful eye on the little girl over the following day, waiting for James's return, already rehearsing the story she'd tell him. Mia quit suddenly. Left in the night. Couldn't handle the pressure of the job. Something believable. Something that would close the door on Mia Coleman forever and leave Victoria standing exactly where she wanted to be, alone with James and everything he owned. But Victoria had underestimated one thing. 3-year-olds notice more than adults think they do. And they remember the people they love, even when someone tries very hard to make them forget. By Friday night, Harper hadn't seen her mother in over 24 hours, and no amount of distraction, toys, or gentle lies from Victoria could quiet the small, persistent ache growing in her chest. She kept wandering toward the kitchen, toward the basement door. Standing in front of it, small hand pressed flat against the wood, whispering, "Mommy," into the silence on the other side. What would you do if you were in Mia's place, locked away with no way to reach your child? Tell us honestly in the comments. By the second night, the little girl had stopped asking questions and started looking for answers herself. Down in the basement, Mia had lost track of exact hours, but she knew it had been more than a full day. Her wrists were raw where she'd tied a length of old curtain rope around them in a desperate, half-formed idea of freeing herself by working the knots against a rusted nail on an old shelf. Victoria had bound her to a wooden chair sometime during the first night, tightening the restraints herself with a calm, businesslike efficiency that still made Mia's stomach turn to think about. The basement had grown cold. Her throat was dry from calling out, from crying, from praying in whispered fragments to a God she hoped was still listening. But it wasn't fear for herself that consumed her most. It was Harper. Every hour that passed, the image of her daughter's small, frightened face grew louder in Mia's mind than any physical discomfort. She thought about Harper's inhaler, tucked in a drawer in their cottage that Victoria likely had no idea existed, and prayed her daughter's asthma stayed quiet, that the stress of this wasn't triggering anything in that small body. She thought about all the mornings Harper crawled into her bed asking for pancakes shaped like stars. She thought about how frightened her little girl must be, surrounded by a woman whose smile had never once reached her eyes. Mia had managed to loosen the ropes enough by Friday night to slip one hand free, though the chair leg she'd tied herself to with a second length of rope proved harder to escape. She dragged the chair, inch by agonizing inch, toward the small barred window, hoping against hope that if she could just reach it, someone passing on the road beyond the property line might hear her. It was slow, exhausting work, her muscles screaming, her wrists bleeding from the rough rope, but she kept going, fueled by nothing but the thought of her daughter's face. Upstairs, Harper had reached her own breaking point. Saturday morning arrived gray and quiet. Victoria, exhausted from 2 days of managing a toddler she had no real patience for, had fallen into a heavy sleep on the living room couch after finally getting Harper to eat breakfast and settle in front of the television. It was the first real gap in her vigilance since Thursday. Harper, small and quiet in her socked feet, slipped off the couch where she'd been sitting beside the sleeping Victoria and wandered toward the kitchen. She had been near that basement door a dozen times over the past 2 days, always pulled back to some other room, some other distraction. This time no one stopped her. She pressed her ear to the door the way she'd done before, and this time faintly she heard something. Voice. Her mother's voice, hoarse and weak, calling out from somewhere far below. "Mommy," Harper whispered, pressing both small palms flat against the wood. She couldn't open the deadbolt. It was far too high, far too heavy for tiny hands. But Harper was smart in the particular stubborn way toddlers sometimes are, and she remembered something. Daddy, that's what she'd started calling James quietly, when Victoria wasn't around to hear it and correct her. Daddy's car. She had heard it, faint but unmistakable, coming up the long driveway just minutes earlier. James had landed Saturday morning instead of Saturday evening. His last meeting had wrapped early, and he'd caught an earlier flight home, eager, in a way he couldn't quite explain to himself, to get back to his house. Harper turned from the basement door and ran. Actual full-speed toddler running, socked feet sliding on the marble floor, toward the front entrance, just as James stepped through the door, suitcase still in hand, calling out a tired, cheerful hello into the quiet house. He barely had time to set his bag down before Harper crashed into his legs, small arms wrapping around him with a desperate strength that immediately told him something was very wrong. "My mommy has been missing for 3 days, Harper cried, her voice breaking on every word, tears streaming down her face in a way James had never seen from this normally bright, giggling child. She's gone, I can't find her. Victoria said she left, but I heard her voice. She's downstairs, please, please." James dropped to his knees, gripping the little girl by her small shoulders, his heart suddenly pounding in a way it hadn't in years. "Harper, sweetheart, slow down. Where did you hear her voice?" Harper grabbed his hand with both of hers and pulled, tugging him toward the kitchen with a strength that seemed impossible for someone so small, leading him straight to the basement door. James tried the handle. He pressed his ear against the wood the way Harper had, and there it was, faint, hoarse but unmistakable. "Please. Someone. Please, my daughter." Mia's voice. Every protective instinct James had buried since his wife's death rose up in him at once, sharp and furious and absolutely certain. He didn't call out. He didn't hesitate. He threw his shoulder against the door once, twice, and on the third try, the old lock finally gave way, splintering off the frame. James took the basement stairs 2 at a time, Harper close behind him despite his instruction to stay upstairs, and what he found at the bottom made his blood run cold. Mia was slumped in a wooden chair near the barred window, one wrist raw and bleeding where she'd worked herself half free of the ropes, her lips cracked from dehydration, dark circles carved deep beneath her eyes. She looked up at the sound of footsteps, and when she saw James, when she saw Harper's small face peering around his legs, she broke down into sobs of pure, overwhelming relief. "James," she rasped. "Victoria, she locked me down here, I've been here since Thursday. I couldn't get to Harper. I didn't know if she was safe." James was already at her side, working frantically at the remaining ropes with hands that shook harder than he could ever remember them shaking, even in the worst boardroom crisis of his career. "I'm here. I've got you. Harper's safe, you're safe, I promise you, I've got you both." Behind him, at the top of the stairs, a floorboard creaked. Victoria stood in the doorway, finally woken by the sound of the broken lock, her face draining of color as she took in the scene below. James on his knees beside Mia, Harper's small hand gripping her mother's arm, the rope still tangled around the chair legs, the raw evidence of exactly what she had done laid bare in front of the one person she had spent 8 months carefully, meticulously deceiving. For a long, terrible moment, no one said anything at all. Have you ever had to make an impossibly hard choice to protect someone you love? Share your story with us below. Some moments don't need words. The truth speaks loud enough on its own. James rose slowly from his knees, and when he turned to face Victoria standing at the top of the basement stairs, something in his expression had changed completely. The warmth, the softness, the willingness to believe the best of her that had carried them through 8 months together, all of it had drained away, replaced by something colder and far more certain than Victoria had ever seen from him. "Explain this to me," he said, his voice deathly quiet. "Explain to me right now why the woman who has worked in my home for 2 years is tied to a chair in my basement, why my fiancé is standing at the top of the stairs looking like she's seen a ghost, and why a 3-year-old had to drag me down here to find her own mother." Victoria's mouth opened, and for the first time in 8 months, no smooth, practiced lie came out. She had a dozen stories rehearsed for a dozen different scenarios, but she had never actually imagined James finding out this way, catching her flat-footed with no time to build the narrative first. "James, it's not what it looks like. I was going to." "Don't." The word came out sharp enough that Victoria actually flinched. "Don't you dare stand there and lie to me while she's sitting right there with rope burns on her wrists." Mia, still weak, still shaking, managed to speak. "She locked me down here Thursday afternoon. Told me I should have quit months ago. Told me she'd worked too hard to let me and my daughter stand in the way of what she wanted." Her voice cracked, but she pushed through it, years of swallowed fear finally finding their way out. "She's been planning this, James. Not just this weekend. For a long time." James looked at Victoria, waiting, some small, foolish part of him still hoping she'd deny it, still hoping there was some explanation that would make this not what it so clearly was. But Victoria said nothing. Her silence, more than any confession, told him everything he needed to know. He thought about the missing gardeners, replaced without his approval. He thought about the boxed-up photos of his late wife. He thought about every small, cold comment about Mia and Harper not fitting into their future, every carefully timed tear that had made him doubt his own instincts every single time they'd tried to warn him. He thought about how easily he had let himself be talked out of trusting the people who had never once given him a reason not to. "Get out of my house," James said. "James, please let me explain. You had 8 months to explain yourself honestly. You chose lies instead. Get your things. You have 20 minutes before I call the police, and believe me, Victoria, I will call them, and I will make sure every single detail of what you did to this woman and her daughter is in that report." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. There was a finality in it that left no room for negotiation. "We are done. Whatever this was, whatever you thought you were building here, it's over." Victoria stood frozen for one more moment, something flickering across her face that might have been genuine fear for the first time since she'd arrived at the estate. Fear of consequences, fear of a plan finally, completely unraveling, before she turned and fled up the stairs without another word. James didn't watch her go. He was already back on his knees beside Mia, gently working the last of the rope free from her chair, murmuring apologies he didn't need to give but couldn't stop himself from offering anyway. "I should have seen it sooner. I should have listened when you first came to me. I'm so sorry, Mia. I'm so sorry this happened in my house, under my roof, to you and to Harper." Mia, finally free, pulled her daughter into her arms and held her so tightly that Harper let out a small, surprised laugh through her own tears, the first laugh either of them had managed in 3 long days. "You came back early," Mia whispered, looking up at James over Harper's shoulder. "If you hadn't." "I know," James said quietly. "I know." The next few hours moved in a blur. Police arriving to take statements, a doctor called to check on Mia's wrists and dehydration. Harper refusing to leave her mother's side for even a moment. Her small fingers curled tight around Mia's hand as if letting go might make her disappear again. Victoria was gone before the police finished their report, her car already speeding down the long driveway one final time. And this time, no one stood on the front steps to wave goodbye. It took weeks for the full truth to come out. A private investigator James hired uncovered that Victoria Hale wasn't even her real name, that she'd done versions of this same scheme twice before in other states, other houses, other wealthy, grieving men looking for someone to fill a silence in their lives. James felt something close to relief when he learned that, oddly enough. Relief that it hadn't been something uniquely wrong with him that made him miss it, that she had built a career out of being impossible to see clearly until it was almost too late. Mia took 2 weeks off, fully paid, no question asked, while she and Harper healed from what had happened. When she returned, James met her at the front door himself, something he'd never done before. "You don't have to come back if you don't want to," he told her. "I would understand completely if this house feels like the last place you'd want to be." Mia looked around at the home she'd spent 2 years caring for. The marble floors Harper had learned to walk across, the kitchen where her daughter had demanded star-shaped pancakes 100 times over, the basement that would always carry a shadow now, but a shadow that no longer had the power it once did. "This house was never the problem," she said finally. "The person in it was. And she's gone now." She came back. Not just as staff this time, but as something closer to family. James made sure of that, restructuring her role, her pay, her security in ways that left no question about how much her honesty, her strength, and her daughter's small, fierce love had ultimately saved him from a mistake that could have cost him everything he had left. Harper, for her part, seemed to forget the fear faster than anyone expected, the way children sometimes do, though every so often James would catch her standing at the top of the basement stairs, just for a second, before she'd shake it off and run back to whatever game she'd been playing. He never mentioned it. He just made sure, every single day after, that she never had reason to stand there and be afraid again. There's a strange kind of grace in almost losing everything and getting a second chance to see clearly. James learned that the hardest way possible, that the people who truly love you rarely need to perform it, and the ones who perform it loudest are often hiding the most. Real trust isn't built on grand gestures or perfect smiles. It's built in the quiet, unglamorous moments, in someone staying honest even when it costs them, in a mother fighting through fear for her child, in a little girl brave enough to lead a grown man to the truth when every adult around her had missed it. To everyone watching this story today, thank you for staying with us through every twist and turn. If this story reminded you of anyone in your own life, someone whose quiet honesty deserves to be seen and valued, we hope you'll hold on to that a little tighter tonight. Sometimes the people who ask for the least are the ones who deserve the most. If this story touched your heart the way it touched ours while we told it, hit that like button. It genuinely means the world to us and helps more people find stories like Mia and Harper's. If you want more real, emotional stories about love, family, and the moments that change everything, hit subscribe because we share a new one every single week. Tell us in the comments, what part of this story hit you the hardest? We read every single one, and we'd love to hear from you. And if you know someone who needs a reminder today that honesty and love always find their way to the light, send this video to them right now. Thank you so much for watching, friend. We'll see you in the next story.